Hi everyone, I think we're going live and we hopefully should be working. So welcome today. We're going to be having a video, an interview that's going to be starting in about 30 minutes. We'll talk with a coach who had an interesting story being with a narcissist, deciding to leave him and deciding to leave the children behind also at the same time. And in the meantime, I can take any questions that you might have. Let people join gradually when that happens. In the meantime, I wanted to share, I've been reading a book recently by a chap called Stephen Hassan, Dr. Stephen Hassan, and he talks about combating cult mind control. Absolutely fascinating, especially when we see the parallels between narcissists and cults. And one of the key ideas I'd like to share with you today is that if somebody were to leave a cult, we wouldn't expect them to be fully functional the day afterwards. However, we would assume they need a proper program in order to deprogram themselves, basically, to remove the impact narcissists have, cults have on them, and the brainwashing and so on and so forth. And I'd suggest that if you leave a relationship with a narcissist, you mustn't underestimate just how important the deprogramming is. So changing the light. The deprogramming is. Why? Simply because things that narcissists will say to you will continue having an impact over the years. And until you become aware of what they said and the experiences you've had, you probably will reproduce the same patterns, but you won't know why you're reproducing these patterns. And it can be something as simple as let's say you make a suggestion for a restaurant, and the other person always shoots it down. It's like, that one is terrible, this one is awful, to at one point demoralize you. So you go, well, there's no point in me suggesting something if systematically everything I say gets shot down because you don't like it. That doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to stop suggesting. And then when you leave that relationship, the next one, there's a probability that you will struggle to to start suggesting again. Of course, you might just say, I've been waiting to do this, so it's great to make suggestions, and somebody likes it, and somebody's being positive and receptive, and, that's fantastic. There's always a risk that when you enter a new relationship, you carry the baggage from the previous one. Now, it's one thing to exit let's call it a regular relationship, a relationship where that's, somewhat, well, normal and healthy, and carry baggage. No, that's one thing. It's something else when the previous relationship has been aimed specifically at destroying you, destroying your personality, the way you think, the way you, how do I put it? Just your reflexes, your habits, and it's how do I put it? It's not the same dynamic to reconstruct yourself after a regular breakup, which may be messy, and having been in a relationship that was toxic and that was designed to destroy you. Now, if somebody were to leave a cult, we would expect to spend time doing psychotherapy, time to reconnect with old friends, reconnect with family, reconnect with hobbies. It's important, in my opinion, to have a program that would do exactly this. And I was just thinking about it, seeing some periods of my life after breakups, which I hadn't realized were toxic. Looking back, I'd think it's strange that it took me such a long time to rebound. But with the keys, and especially after reading this book by Stephen Hassan, with the keys that there was a high level of toxicity and pollution and abuse that was happening, it becomes much more self-evident that I just needed time to rebuild myself, but without realizing what had really happened. And obviously, if I can reduce the time frame for other people, then it's fantastic. So we can. And this, by the way, I'll be doing another video talking about similarities between cults and narcissists. But to do it quickly, some of the keys is to recognize what the symptoms of a cult are. And we know that anytime we find a person or an organization that seems to have those symptoms, we know it's a pretty bad sign. So, for instance, one of the things cults do is separate people from their friends and family. So if you join any kind of organization that is encouraging to separate people from their friends and family, you know that's a bit of a red flag. And that can be, and I've seen it with, strange enough, NGOs. some companies, a lot of non-profits, a lot of associations. It's one thing if somebody says, I'll come and I'll donate one evening or half a day per week to the organization. But when the organization is trying to pressure people to be there constantly, that's a really bad sign. And when the organization is trying to turn people against their friends and family and parents, it's a terrible sign. I remember being in situations where, well, it was back in the 90s. There was some thing happening with, it was when Hong Kong might have gone back to China, and some people wanted to do something about, make me sign something about China. And I had relatives who were in Hong Kong, and I was thinking, even if I agree with you, I don't want to do anything that might hurt my relatives. Family is more important than anything else. And any organization that tries to say that they are more important than family, that to me that's dodgy. That's something to look out for. There's no reason why they would. Any health organization or group of people would be encouraging other people to have better relationships with the family and friends, insofar as possible. But they wouldn't encourage creating a gap and a distance. So when we see that, it's a really bad sign. In the same way, you can have companies who encourage people to work a lot. And, you can argue that it's the culture of the company. But if in the company, if you're working there and one of your relatives is ill, it's one thing if they let you do your thing and say, we'll let you balance it out. It's something else if they really discourage you spending time with your ill relatives if they need your help. Most of the time, if they're reasonable, they'll say something along the lines of, we'll let you work it out. We give you some flexibility. If you need to work remotely for a while, we'll work it out. Come to us with a suggestion and we see how we can work it out. If they make a comment such as, we're expecting you to be serious about this. Your relative is ill, so what? That can be a sign of a psychopathic organization. And there's something to bear in mind also. It's, hi Pete. So I'm reading that about the family being like a cult. That's often the case. They operate in the same way, same dynamics, the same unhealthy dynamics, basically, where people want the well-being of the organization first before the well-being of the individuals. Now, something to bear in mind, I think, is when you look at the dynamics, it can be dynamics between two people or multiple people. In all cases, the biggest question is, to what extent are the individuals there to serve the organization, or is the organization or group there to do what's possible to help the individuals thrive? If you're starting a company or an organization or an NGO, the goal ought to be to work towards a goal, but have people benefit from the process. So if you're working towards an end goal, you want people to find a balance. If someone is sacrificing themselves towards the end goal, it's not sustainable. So that would be akin to, if you're on an airplane, and you're losing altitude, losing oxygen, the first thing you should do is put on your own oxygen mask, because you shouldn't be a burden to others. You should make sure that you're doing okay. What happens in some organizations is they don't want you to put on your oxygen mask first. They want you to go around and get exhausted and give your time and energy to everyone else constantly, because that way, first of all, you're providing a lot of things for free. Often it's free labor, it's free attention. Often it's free support. But also you're getting so tired that you don't observe what's happening and you're losing your critical mindset. This can be the case whether you're in an organization, company, or in a relationship with a toxic person or the narcissist. Remember that one of the key elements is sleep deprivation. Narcissists won't want their partners to sleep enough, and they won't want them to be clear-headed. Organizations will discourage people sleeping enough and being rested, because when we sleep enough, we become more critical of what's happening. We see things for what they are, and it's harder to manipulate us. Very often people will say, I don't understand how I could have fallen for a narcissist or fallen for a cult or fallen for a scam. And if you take a step further back and you look at the dynamics that led up to it, what you see is, a matter of fact, I can just do a drawing. I think that's going to make more sense. So, what happens is we look at the timeline, and the person here is looking directly at this point and going, I don't understand how I fell for the scam. And they're looking at it from the point of view of, well, this is basically now. But what they don't realize is that falling for the scam, there were all of these small points which, so which way I do it? I'll do it this way. So the people had a certain energy level, something happened and it dropped. And then it kept dropping. And every time it dropped, they became more vulnerable. And so it's very hard when we look back to think, I don't understand how I could have gone from my usual self all the way down to, this person who's easy to manipulate. But they don't see that it was a step-by-step process, and all of the small comments, all of the nagging, all of the sleep deprivation, food deprivation, and so on and so forth, is what led specifically to the person ending up in this place. If we started back here, let's say start, it would be unimaginable to end up at this low point. But it's a gradual process. And it's easy to forget it's a gradual process. It's easy to ignore the small comments, easy to ignore the snide remarks, the contempt, the passive-aggressive comments, the small stressors. Each taken individually doesn't seem like very much. However, when we start compiling all of the elements, we realize that actually that's a lot of toxicity that adds up. This is one of the keys, I think, that people forget is it's easy to focus on it's easy to focus on the part that we see. And here we go. Sorry, realigning something. It's easy to focus simply on the end result, but what we have to bear in mind is if we take each part individually and add it up, what is that like? That's one of the reasons why I like to focus so much on toxic behaviors, because each behavior taken individually, each incident individually is not that much. But if we add it up, what happens then? And it's when we add it up that we see just to what extent these things are really toxic and really bad. And remember that we can, here we go, we can also do this graph that I like to do, which is we see the level of toxicity and the frequency of the toxicity. And we often simply look for the behaviors that are highly toxic. Actually, let me draw this differently. So we often simply look at the parts that are, do it like this, that are highly toxic. So if we see that something's highly toxic, or one person at one specific point is incredibly toxic, we notice that because it's a very violent outburst. It's something that's terribly dramatic. But what we have to remember is you have a whole part of toxicity that sort of simmers below the surface. If it's something that is not very toxic and very infrequent, well, that's part of being human, because all of us can be unpleasant, unthoughtful, selfish, and so on. That happens. Where we have to be extremely careful is when we see the behaviors that are very frequent, somewhat or very frequent, and have some level of toxicity, because that is what can wear someone down. Snide remarks, snarky comments, the looks, the contempt. This is not small. This part also adds up significantly. So yes, we can notice the person who is infrequently very toxic. Where we have to also be careful is, well, especially, and this is supposed to be easier to notice, it's the people who, they're number one, the people who are constantly extremely toxic. But what we often notice is that people start small, and then they grow in frequency. They also grow in intensity, and usually they do both. So it's not static. At first, with the love bombing phase, people will be low in toxicity, and then they start gradually. It probably, I'm guessing, let's see, like this, there we go. My guess is that if we have intensity and frequency, my guess it would be something along the lines of this. There are a few breaking points, and those are usually the tests. We're actually going to be talking about this in the video that will be start going live in 15 minutes. So these usually will be the tests. In other words, I will test you and see if you let me get away with it or not. If you don't let me get away with it, in all likelihood, I'll continue and then I'll test again. And I'll keep doing this until you give in. Because eventually, if I'm a toxic person, I want to increase the intensity. There we go. Intensity. Frequency. My goal is to do that. My goal is to be more abusive. My goal is to hurt you. Remember, all of these breaking points, they can be small comments. All of them. Small tests to see. And the tricky thing here is you're free to walk away. But if you don't walk away, then they have you hooked. And because you didn't walk away, it's harder to think something bad happened, I didn't walk away. It's often, well, if I stayed, it must be fine. Logically, right? Because if it was bad, if it was really bad, you'd walk away. But if you're staying, it must be fine. If it's fine, then, it's fine. And then we continue. And sometimes you go back and you go, that all of these weird tests you might not have noticed, but in retrospect, they can be the things that make you really nervous. Like I remember one horrible person who, when we were not in the same place, and she asked me at one point, oh, by the way, are we being exclusive? And my reaction was, well, I am, yes, I wanted to reassure her. But in retrospect, afterwards, I thought, that's a very weird question to ask. I mean, if I wanted, it's one thing, did she want to know about me? Or was she trying to test something? And it was actually a test. It was really interesting because afterwards I asked her, when you asked that question, and that was fascinating. I was asking her, when you asked that question, it sounded to me like you wanted to know because you had the opportunity to sleep with someone else and you wanted to know if I was okay with it. And she said, yeah, I did. And of course, that's really strange when you're in a relationship where you go, because I'd assumed that she wanted to know if I was being trustworthy. But you go, no, I wanted to know if it was okay if I slept with someone else. But then you start thinking, well, we were talking about, it was beginning of a relationship, talking about things being serious. Why would you be wanting to sleep with someone else when you're talking about things getting serious with me? But I was also thinking, who is this person? The person didn't just fall out of a tree, so how did you find them? Like, what was going on? Because you were talking to me about things being serious. You were talking to me about clearing out any loose ends to avoid anything happening. And I wasn't getting a straightforward answer, so I just asked this person, I'm guessing you knew them from before, because otherwise you would have been looking around for someone else. She said, yes, you did. And it turned out that it was the person whom she had been dating when I met her, and she'd said that she'd broken things off, that everything was finished, everything was clear. Which then led me to ask, just think, well, are you sure it was clear for them? Because you told me that you'd ended the relationship, and now you're telling me that they're asking you out on a date, getting hopeful that something might happen, and if I was okay with it, something would have happened. So this was the whole kind of messy situation. Afterwards, I realized, of course, this person lies, the person is deceptive. For all I know, the other person, the other guy, was not aware that they were not in a relationship. And for all I knew, when she started dating her boss, she was telling him that she was single, or that we'd broken up, or I didn't know what she was saying. But I did realize around that point that the correlation between what she said and reality was not really that high, and that I wasn't able to trust her. And that was quite a realization, because I'd assumed, of course, that she was trustworthy, and clearly, of course, as things showed, I was wrong about that. So these are tests. Pay attention to the tests. Narcissists do this. Cults do the same thing. And when Peter's mentioning about the families will do the same thing. In the family, if you have a few toxic people, they can provoke you to see if you react. If you don't react, then you get sucked in. If you do react, then you're the problem. You're the one creating the drama. In those cases, usually the best thing to do is figure out a way to move away, to step away, to explain that you're not interested in, whatever's going on, and try to figure out try to figure out how you can, just avoid losing energy in that kind of drama, because that is absolutely exhausting to be in. But it's really important when you look at these parts, at these dynamics, observe who is testing you, how they are testing you, and don't assume it's good faith, because very often it is not good faith. If you have any questions, by the way, in the chat, please go ahead. We'll be ending in 8 minutes, and I invite you to join the live premiere of the interview I had with Heidi Brock, who's a coach, who's got an interesting story about leaving a toxic person, leaving the children behind, and then you'll see. I mean, here's the spoiler: everything ended up well. It's a fascinating conversation that we had. So yeah, back to the cults. Cults and narcissists will be using roughly the same manipulation techniques and tactics. One of the reasons for that simply is that it works really well. Manipulation works beautifully, and they take advantage of the same weaknesses that we have, the same struggles that we have comprehending reality. They'll be using the same cognitive biases. They'll be, how do I put it, attacking the same, or using the same logical fallacies. Often it's a matter of manipulation and reframing. It's a matter of, here's something else. It's a matter of rebranding and hypnosis. So I'll mention this because I just thought about it the other day. Often they will use the wrong word to describe something. One of the words they use to describe or to misdescribe things, or it feels like a description, but actually it's the wrong branding. Wrong branding would mean saying, this pen, I'll call it a banana. If I call it a banana, you're automatically thinking, well, it must be a fruit because he called it a banana, even though it looks like a pen, but there's something weird going on. So one of the words in this case is, here we go, I should be able to do this, there we go. One of the words in this case is theory. A theory is something very specific. A theory is a series of ideas that can be tested and can, this is absolutely key, can be falsified. If I have a theory, it's the theory of relativity, for example. The theory is there. We see how we can test it, and this is one of the key points when we want to think clearly. If we're intellectually honest, and Karl Popper came up with this, we should be able to falsify either the theory or the hypothesis. Hypotheses are a bit different to theories. It's sort of one level below, and the theory is more. There's a better definition, but the theory is better constructed than the hypothesis. The hypothesis would be, we have the idea, but we have to go and test it. We're not sure about this. But the bottom level is dogma. And dogma is something that you'll have encountered when you deal with narcissists. They will consider that they have a series of ideas that make sense, that are argued, that sort of work together. But dogma is simply saying something is true. A dogma is a statement. And it's a statement that's not backed up by facts, not backed up by logic. It is simply saying, this is a banana, and if you disagree with me, there's a problem with you. Or it would be saying, on the moon, there are squirrels that look like bananas. And I know it, and you can't question it. If you question it, there's something wrong with you. And we might say, well, we haven't. What leads you to believe this? If you're dealing with a dogmatist, then the dogmatist will say, I know I'm right. Who are you to question me? I know and then even if we go to the moon and we look for squirrels that look like bananas, we're not going to find any. But a dogmatist would refuse to say, well, I might be wrong. This is one of the keys. When people refuse to consider the possibility they might be wrong, you might be dealing with a narcissist. You probably are dealing with a dogmatist. And it might simply be that you're dealing with somebody with incredibly low IQ. And that happens, unfortunately, all the time. And sometimes it's a combination. Something also that is interesting to notice is that a number of dogmas start in the brains of narcissists. They will make claims that they can't back up with facts, but they will explain to, well, they'll tell people, I'm right, and then they hallucinate the reasons why they are right. Narcissists are drawn to these dogmas because instead of thinking and trying to apprehend the world and trying to map out the world, it's much easier and it gives them power and gives them clout. So an image for that would be If you want to understand how the world functions, it's a bit like having a map. If you're in London and I give you a map of Paris, you're going to notice that you can't navigate. If you have like a theory or hypothesis that it should work, you try it, you check, and you see if it works or doesn't work, and then you amend it. You might go, well, we found a McDonald's on both of them, but you're in London, map of Paris, I don't see an Eiffel Tower, and here I'm standing at something that looks like Big Ben, and I don't see any of that on the map, so I'm probably got the wrong map. The dogmatist would claim the map must be right. If you think the map is wrong, you are the problem, or the city is the problem. The map must be right, and therefore you have to follow it. Why? Well, probably they monetize the map. Probably they like having the power, and sometimes they just like seeing how far they can push their nonsense before someone says something. And then they can throw a fit, then they can create problems, then they can create fights, and they can be obnoxious, which is usually what they want. Remember, the goal of the narcissist is to extract attention and extract energy. One of the easiest ways to extract energy is to create problems so that people then get stressed and people get wound up. And it's incredibly, incredibly effective. Another point, quickly, will be, because we'll be discussing this in 2 minutes in the video, is, and this is one of the points why, for me, it's really key that people learn to think for themselves, is that if someone tells you what to think, they're taking power away from you. Whenever someone says something, myself included, I encourage you to think about it, weigh the pros and cons, and make up your own mind. And you might disagree with me, and you might be right, which is fine. If everybody thinks and we compare the ideas, we all learn, we uncover blind spots, assuming that some people know better than you, are higher up than you, is giving power away. It could be that some of the explanations I share are helpful. Mind you, I share them, not as somebody who's higher than you, but somebody who has different experience, and if whatever I share is helpful, then I'm delighted, because it gives more meaning to everything that I went through. The point is not to be above you. The point is to be at the same level, and for you to think if it makes sense or not. This is one of the keys when it comes to dealing with any kind of content, is observe who treats you as an equal. It's something we learn when we study to be a therapist, is to not put ourselves above others, but treat others as equals, because the person who knows your life best is you. And if someone talks down to you and pretends they know your life better than you do, you have to see how they're monetizing it. And most of the time they are monetizing it. That's why they do it. If we want to disempower people, we can do it. It's pretty easy, but it's pretty cynical. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining. I invite you to join the video that should be popping up now when I stop this. If not, if you go to the channel, you will see the video, the interview with Heidi Brockie. And let me see if I can just pull that up. There we go. It should be, here we go. Stay with a narcissist or leave without your kids. And that will be starting just about now. Thank you everyone for joining. See you soon.